This is Stewardship for the New Millennium, and you are welcome. As we move forward, I'm going to ask you to type any questions you have in the chat, and we will follow up with you if we aren't able to answer your questions during the webinar. This is a very highly subscribed webinar. Now, as we get started, another thing I'm going to ask you to do is we're going to take a little survey. I'd like you to type into the chat why you think people give. Now, we'll come back to that later in our discussions, but just for now, go ahead, don't be shy, type in why you think people give. While that's going on, I have the mission statement for the Episcopal Church Foundation on your screen, and I left it up there on purpose for a while all the giving and financial capabilities, leadership, sets mission, and attract support. So ECF helps people build leadership by training vestries. We use ECF Vital Practices. If you don't know what this is, go to ecf.org. It's a wonderful online resource in which lots of congregations share their experience and best practices in real time. As we find organizations, congregations, and dioceses build strength and leadership, they need ways to handle that support that this attracts, and we're going to be talking about that. So we help you with stewardship, your annual giving, capital campaigns, planned giving, and endowment management. So here's a slide of what we'll cover tonight. A very big important part of what we'll talk about tonight is the different kinds of givers, why people give and who they are, changes in giving trends in the last decade or so, how to reach those different kinds of givers, and then, best of all, the role of gratitude and fund. Now, there are essentially, in the broad overview, 3 different kinds of giving. Annual giving covers your operating budget. This is something that the donor gives from their operating funds, basically from cash flow. And essentially, you want to tie this to your daily mission and ministry, whether you are a hospital, a university, a parish, a school, any of those things. Related to that is capital giving. Capital giving is for specific projects, often related to building. Think about this in terms of your home. You're going to buy a new home, or you need a new roof, or you need a new car. You know that you could do this the most effectively from accrued assets, the things that you had saved up. But the average person does through a combination of accrued assets and cash flow. So as you think about this from your donor's perspective, you want to think about the ways that you can make this kind of giving work for them. It's tied to your future and to the growth of your mission. Planned giving is ultimate giving. This funds the ongoing activities. Usually it comes from the donor's estate, and it makes a statement about their values after they are gone. Now, I'm realizing that the way we have the screen formatted makes the slides fairly small because we still have a lot of webcams on. Can you all see the slides okay, or shall we reformat the screen so that the slides are larger?
Oh,
okay.
That's nice.
Oh.
Much better.
Much better. Oh, good. Okay, that works better. If you'd like to go ahead and turn off your web cameras, you can do that too. That will add a little bit more space, not a lot. So many churches talk about stewardship, and they say that this is different from fundraising. I'm going to talk a little bit about how that is, what's different about stewardship and fundraising. Stewardship is how you understand the responsibility that you have to your gifts. That's financial, intellectual, social, all of those. Many of you will see drawings like the ones we have here that relate to stewardship. And people talk about them in terms of the converted and the committed and the uncommitted. The inner circle of this drawing that you see here would be what we call converted donors. These are your strongest donors who give out of a developed understanding of stewardship and their relationship to God. These donors in your organization, whether you're a parish or a school, will give between 8 to 12% of their income. Remember that. When people start talking about tithing, your most committed donors will be giving between 8 and 12% of their income. At the next level in the circle, see sort of out here, is what we call committed givers. They give out of a developed understanding of, you are one of several charities that they are giving to. These givers give about 5% of their income, and you are competing with other charities for that 5%. On the outer circle, right here, are what we call the uncommitted. These are the people who come to church around Christmas and Easter. They maybe put $1 or $2 in the plate, and that's the extent of their giving. Stewardship is the training that leads your givers from that outer circle to the inner circle. Fundraising, by contrast, is a professional skill that's backed by a lot of research. And to the extent that you ignore that research, you will continue to lose givers to nonprofits who do it better. So I'm going to talk about that research now, and I'm going to throw a lot of statistics at you. If you had a chance to look at the PDF of the slides before this began, you know what's coming. If you didn't, don't worry about it. You've got the slides, or you will get them afterwards. So we're going to go quickly. Don't panic. First of all, let's look at who gives. This is good news. Of all the charitable dollars given away in a given year, 72% come from individuals. This is good for parishes because it's pretty rare that we get corporate sponsorships or gifts from foundations. Notice how giving went up significantly around the 90s and then dipped back down. It looks like there was a very strong increase beginning in the late 70s, early 80s. But when you recalculate this as a percentage of the gross domestic product, what you see is that giving stays pretty steady around 2% of gross domestic product. So it's true that giving is tied to the economy. This is where the rubber hits the road. This looks like good news. Of all the charitable dollars in 2012, 32% of them went to religious organizations. However, in the past 10 years, that percentage has declined about 14 percentage points. Every year, the church has lost between 1 and 3 percentage points of the marketplace. So why? In the last 10 years or so, there's been a tectonic shift in philanthropy as baby boomers, those who were born after 1945, have come of age as leaders and philanthropists. They've brought along a cultural shift, and these areas have impacted how Generation X and millennials operate as well. Traditionalists, who are defined as those born before 1946, are motivated by faith in institutions, they're motivated by duty, and they think in terms of legacy. The new philanthropists, that would be baby boomers and those who come after them, are motivated by very different things. And we're going to unpack this a whole lot in the course of the workshop, so we're not going to spend a whole lot of time here. What I want you to notice now is how the language on the left still sounds pretty much like the average church stewardship language, that we give out of God's abundance, which has a subtle implication of duty, that we owe something to God. We use the term legacy in discussing planned gifts, for instance. We often use legacy and preservation to go with the kinds of capital campaign projects we talk about. Now, look at the language on the right. Remember the words impact and result. I'm going to show you what that means when you're talking to your donors. Because if donors have been giving the same percentage for the last 10 years, but they've been giving less and less to religion, our question is, where did the money go? The Make-A-Wish Foundation, which is defined as a public policy organization, giving is up 3%. Care.org, international aid, up 6.9%. Nothing But Net, health, up 4.6%. If you add all these up, what you realize is that's roughly the 14% that giving to religion has declined in the last decade. Now, this is actually good news, my friends, because if you think about it, all those slogans that you just saw, have the power, change the world, save lives, these are our message. This is what Christianity does, and the biblical mandate to serve the poor, feed the hungry, care for the sick, are being absorbed into our culture. 33% A 33% increase in nonprofits over the last decade has taken over much of the work that used to be associated with church outreach. And we could do well to learn how those organizations are reaching donors who used to give to us. Now, it's very easy to think about this in terms of your own language and what you are accustomed to. I tended to be stuck there myself, and I have to say that Erin came along and changed the way I thought about that. And if we can get Erin's web camera operating again, then we can get her up here to talk about it.
Thanks, Terry. I'm going to give them just a moment. I have to say I am encouraged that when even viewing those that are participating here this evening, I am seeing a true reflection of our church as a whole, because I saw people of different generations being represented. And I think that that speaks to our need when we're thinking about generational characteristics about fundraising, to really looking at who is in your parish. Oftentimes, it's my impression that, we take into consideration characteristics. Thinking about generational characteristics, oftentimes we think about those in regards to spiritual formation, and we think about those in regards to pastoral care, but we don't think about that with our annual campaigns or even our larger stewardship year-long efforts. And this is a failure, I believe, of our church to really recognize that we all come with different needs and different ways of receiving good news. So let's look at who are in your pew. First is the greatest generation. The greatest generation is identified as being born before 1930. Now, they're defined by the Great Depression, World War II, patriotism. They come as a whole, and all of these characteristics I'm talking about are general characteristics, but they're described as a whole as being loyal to the church with a strong sense of obedience. These are the folks that before, when a bishop would come to say, we need money for X, Y, and Z, these persons would give out of a sense of obedience and a sense of even using the words of tithe, a trust in the government. Terry so wonderfully laid out the differences between converted, committed, and then this last group, which is your occasional giver. The greatest generation often makes that first group, that 8 to 12%, you're converted. Now, of that greatest generation, there's a subset. That's called the silent generation. These folks are born between 1930 and 1945. I specifically chose this picture not because they're snazzy dressers, but because they value conformity and loyalty. They're defined by Cold War, the rising of prosperity, and a willingness to sacrifice. These are the people that may not have had a lot, but what they had, they continue to give sacrificially. And they continue to do that even today. They married early, and they set up the church as we know it. As we see national numbers change over the past 5 to 7 years in annual giving, we're seeing that the number of givers are decreasing, but the average gift is increasing. I tend to believe that sacrificial giving lends itself to this statistic. The people that are giving sacrificially. They're digging deep. So what is the message you want to use? Well, these are the folks that when you think about that earlier slide that Terry used, the traditionalists, you can still use the language of legacy. You built this. We're grateful. And we need your help to continue your legacy moving forward. So what is the strategy? What is the strategy that you need to use? Well, most of these folks are converted, but they still can be swayed by authority figures. These are the people that a one-on-one conversation with a senior warden or, say, a rector or a clergy person can go an awful long way. Feeling as though that they have had a chance to give of themselves and being asked personally by that authority figure, that's an important strategy to utilize. Now, the baby boomer, born between 1946 and 1964, defined by idealism, freedom of the 60s, these are the first to really experience divorce. Not coincidentally, they reject the idea of establishment and routines. The self is more important than the group. Now, that's not a value statement. More, rather, often you'll see these are the folks that might place family as more important than the church, which is still an important value. They need information on impact and how their gift will be used. They don't give just because they are asked, but they want to know, well, how will their gift be used appropriately? They must have transparency in light of their mistrust of institutions. And this can definitely be connected to this idea of them being the first folks to encounter divorce. Now, let's look at what is the message. Terry hit on this earlier, the prioritization of charitable giving. Baby boomers are generous. They give to an abundance of charities. The message they need to hear is, we have been here for you, and we are hoping that you will place us on the top of your giving because we know you have a lot of places where you can choose to give. Strategy, narrative budget, which we will cover later, losing the language of obligation, the shoulds, the coulds, we need you to, moving more into we invite you because this is how your gift will be used. Impactful storytelling, showing pictures of how their gift has been used in the past. And have actual recipients give stories of how their gifts have been used. An example, for instance, if you have a vibrant outreach ministry in your parish, have you considered having a person who's benefited from that outreach ministry come and speak on a Sunday morning, whether it be a person who's received a food staple and maybe a supper that you provide, or a person who has been the recipient of pastoral care at one point. This is something that you can utilize. People want to know, oh, this didn't just get given to an operating budget somewhere. This was given specifically to a person. Generation X. Oh, Generation X, the most misunderstood of all of our generational characteristics. Oftentimes, people will say, oh, those Generation Xers, they're just not really inclined to give. You know, we've tried our best, but it seems like they're a lost cause. I'm here to tell you there is hope. Generation Xers are born between 1965 and 1978. They're defined by individualism, single-parent households. They're of the seeker generation. Most are highly educated. They tend to be coupled later. They're entrepreneurial, cynical of authority. So baby boomers are cynical of institutions. Generation Xers, cynical of authority. Just because someone tells them to do it doesn't mean they're going to do it. There has to be a different reason. They will move or transition from jobs 5 or more times within the first 10 years of their of leaving home, meaning from 21 to 30. They wish to experience church, so may not attend regularly, which makes sense if they're moving 5 to 10 times. They might still feel very connected to their home parish, but not be able to attend. So what to do with that Generation Xer? Well, the message is we are a people, we are a community who care about each other. Even if you are at college, even if you've left and have a family, even if we don't see you, you're still a part of us. And do you remember that person who raised you up in Sunday school? Well, they're leading the ministry now for youth groups. And we're wondering if you would be willing to give to that ministry, putting individuals in front of those ministries. So, strategy. Generation Xers as a whole hate the language of obligation that typically comes during that annual fall drive. Start thinking about year-round education about giving. Don't just focus on the fall. Focus on how to thank people year-round. Terry will tell you more about that in a minute. Relationships with potential givers to leaders of potential ministries. What does that mean? If you have a newcomer coming in, Generation Xer, tie them to a leader of a ministry. Have them see firsthand what that person is up to and develop a relationship with that person. Finally, the millennial generation, born between 1979 and 1980, kind of the cutoff, to 2000. They're defined as being children of divorce. They celebrate diversity and are socially conscious. Parents are advocates and friends. The New York Times has published quite a few articles about this and about the impact parents as friends have had on those millennials in the workplace. Oftentimes they seek mentors. Oftentimes they're seeking gratification. Givens. It's a given that millennials will be in debt. It's a given that they use technology. This impacts their, not only the vehicle in which you reach them, but their ability to give. Now, Pew Research claims that the giving characteristics of this generation are more similar to the greatest generation than any other generation, which is different because many thought that they would mirror those Generation Xers. What this means is that millennials have had opportunities to be socially conscious, have been brought up with this idea of giving to charities. Finally, they require mentorships and relationships to inform their decisions. So the message is, your gift is important to us, and it will impact our lives. And now, how do we get to know you? Because you're important to us. The strategies we could use are developing mentor relationships initiatives, the use of gratification, thanking them, not 2 days later, not 3 days later, not 2 weeks later, immediately developing a system of thanking them. Develop an online community presence. Think about the ways in which you create community on a Sunday morning and apply those to the vehicle you use online. And create online stories of impact. What this means is using Terry's idea of the converted, the committed, and then the occasional giver, you can throw away this idea of 100% of everyone will give, because I can tell you without a doubt 100% of people will not give. And it's a huge burden on you to have to carry that. So I'm here to set you free today from that and instead say, okay, our targeted formation comes with that middle group, that committed group, the converted, those top folks. They're going to give regardless of what you say and how you say it. They're the converted. They're there already giving 8 to 12%. But that committed group, they can raise their gift by 2 to 3 to 4%. Identify who those people are, your growth potential. Determine who are those people in your parish. So, different vehicles for different donors. Here we reiterate some of what I talked about before, baby boomers, prioritization of charitable gifts, investment. Where does $1 of their gift go? How do you break that down? In-person stories of impact. Generation Xers, look for ways to tie time with giving. Lose that language of obligation. Utilize moments of thanks throughout the year. Finally, millennials, create mentor relationships, online stories of impact, online community presence, not just an online presence, but a community presence, and give feedback immediately. Now, I described the importance both with the Generation Xer and with the millennial, this role of gratitude. I'm going to turn it over to Terry to talk a bit more about that.
Thank you, Erin. Well done. Grace under pressure there with the tech issues. The thing that I want to emphasize about gratitude is that it is not just good fundraising, it is also good theology. We all remember the parable of Jesus and the 10 lepers. He tells them, go and wash and you will be clean, and only one leper comes back. And Jesus says, where are the 9? And then he says to the one leper who has returned to thank him, go, your faith has made you whole. Part of the healing process was, in fact, the gratitude. That is part of the strengthening in our communities. It's also very good fundraising. The University of Indiana School of Philanthropy study found that donors who are thanked in a significant way actually tend to give more. Now, this does not mean you need to hand out tie tacks and mugs. It means that your thanks needs to be timely. As Erin said, get those official letters out right away, like within 48 hours max. But get out a handwritten note from the person who's talked to your donor right away. A great trick I learned from one of the best fundraisers I ever studied under was take the note with you before you go to see them, already pre-addressed and stamped. Drop it in the mailbox around the corner. Send an email. One of the easiest and most personal tricks that I've seen is to have photographs of the various ministries that are supported by your donors. I like to send those with a note that says, I hope you put this on your refrigerator to remind you on a daily basis of the difference that your gift is making to St. Swithin. Which brings us to the fact that you want your thanks to be done in a way that evokes your mission. One way to do this in an ongoing basis is to have what some churches call ministry moments during the offertory as the kids are coming in after a great anthem by the choir. During those times of impact in your parish life, take a minute to say to the people, I'd just like to point out that what we're doing now has been made possible by your support. And I want to thank you for that. That's all you say. You say thank you. You should be thanking your donors roughly 7 times every year. There's a great resource for this called 1-Minute Stewardship Sermons. You can get it on Amazon. It's good for cross-referencing some of those church events and potential ways to thank people. Note that as you're thanking people, you're also focusing on impact and you're inviting people to share in your mission. We had a question about that, is how do you talk to all these different cohorts if you're small and you're trying to have a unified message? This is one of the ways you do it. If you're always being grateful for the particular impacts happening, you're going to be reaching various audiences. Now, we took a poll at the beginning about why do people give, and I saw things like guilt, obligation, some good things, love of God. Here you have, as identified by actual professional fundraisers, the 3 top reasons that people give. What's beautiful about this is look at what leads the charge, belief in a cause. You can assume that if people are getting up on Sunday morning and coming to your church, you've got number 1 nailed down. You can assume that if they've been there for a year or 2, they probably respect the staff because there are just too many options in mainline Protestantism for them to stick around if they're unhappy. Where churches have trouble is with number 3. We have a really hard time demonstrating fiscal responsibility. People tend to think that the way to do this is to roll out their line item budget and say, this is what we spent on this and this is what we spent on that. And this is the worst mistake you can make. So if you were planning to do that, please pull that budget right now, and I will tell you what to do instead. Because when you put that budget in front of people, at worst, you are boring and annoying them. I mean, at best. And at worst, you're reminding them of their own budget and how little they have in it, and they're just tightening up the controls. It's the antithesis of generosity. So how do you show fiscal responsibility? My favorite example is Heifer International. Remember all those nonprofits that we showed you at the beginning that are taking your lunch money? This is what they do. Let's see, type into the chat if you are familiar with Heifer International. Does everybody know what they do? They tell you $500 buys a cow, and then they tell you exactly how that cow changes the economy of a village. What you don't know is that those cows are donated by stock traders. The $500 pays for animal husbandry training and transportation for the animals. But that's a lot less interesting. And what does happen is, in fact, that resource, the cow, the chicken, the pig, does change the economy of a village. So Heifer shows you exactly the impact that your $500 will have in a particular village. And they do it through a story. Why can't we do this? My favorite example of how this applies to the church is actually from a former campaign client on the south side of Chicago. I was there helping them get ready for a capital campaign, and after several services, I was worshiping every single service, and at the 11 o'clock service, 3 sort of balding white guys come up to the microphone and they say, Antoine, come on up here. This teenager with dreadlocks and baggy clothes shuffles up to the microphone, and these 3 balding white guys say, Antoine is the first person in his family to go to college. We've been working with him all through high school, and Antoine, we're really proud of you, and to send you on your way, we are giving you this laptop computer. Now, right now, you all are getting a great little tingly feeling. What makes it even better is that this congregation on the south side of Chicago was walking distance from the University of Chicago and the Robert Taylor homes, which at the time were the meanest public housing projects in the country. That church, which inhabited the zone between, had been burned to the ground in the race riots of the mid-70s. And the intervening decades of corporate worship had bent the hearts of the people back toward each other in a way that those 3 balding white guys could actually see Antoine's potential, and Antoine could trust those 3 balding white guys. It cost $1,300 a Sunday to stage 1 service when you factor in the rector's preparation time, the choir, the candles, the electricity, all that sort of thing. Why can't my daughter give a Sunday of world peace instead of giving me a pig from Heifer every Sunday, every Christmas? That's the kind of story that you have. You just don't know it. All of us accept those kinds of stories as the status quo, but your newcomers know what drew them to your congregation. This is what the Harvard Business Review calls a signature experience, and it's what major corporations use to attract and hold exactly the kinds of employees that will do well in their particular environment. Now, it's a self-selecting process in churches, but basically there's so much choice in mainline Protestantism. Your parishioners know what it is about your church that attracted them and that has kept them there. And the best way to find that out is to ask your newcomers, why are you here? What did you love? What holds you here? And then once you've amassed those stories, you want to repeat them and use them as illustrations of your mission. These are stories basically of impact that communicate your mission just as clearly as biblical parables. In fact, what they're doing is showing you how your fundraising can support your stewardship education. It's proclaiming your mission and inviting people to join in. And what you've seen is that that invitation will need to be worded a little bit differently or delivered a little bit differently depending on who you want it to reach. So to answer the question of how do you segment that, if you're putting your message in all the different media that Erin outlined, electronically, personally, through relationships, it will be heard by the group that hears that particular approach. So you're not just speaking to a millennial about mentoring. You're speaking to everyone about mentoring, and the millennials and their parents' generation leaders are the ones who become attached through that mentoring project. What's interesting about all this is that the secular world got there first. They've somehow figured out how to tap into that God-shaped hole in our society so that Heifer International and Oxfam and Care.org are addressing people's yearning to make a difference. And Jesus told us that this would happen. Remember, his disciples came to him and they said, those guys over there, they're throwing out demons and healing people, but they're not using your name. You should make them stop. And what did Jesus say? He said, shh, it's okay, it's okay. They're doing our work too. You should be happy about that. So rather than looking at these nonprofits who are doing such a good job of taking our lunch money as competition, you should look at them as how is it that they're being heard? How are they taking our message out there, and what can we learn from them? Now, one of the things you learned is you have to show fiscal responsibility. What does that look like, and what are you going to do if you don't do a line item budget? Well, first I want to be very clear that your line item budget does still need to be good. It's sort of like diet and exercise. You're not going to advertise it because if it is a lean, mean, well-defended budget, you won't have to advertise it. People will understand that you are making the best doing the best with their resources. You should make it available upon request, but not part of your fundraising project. And the budget needs to reflect your mission. Now, how do you do that? You want to develop what's called a narrative or mission-based budget. And Erin is, once again, our resident expert on this. I'm going to let her walk you through. And Erin, you can bring up the bullet points when they work for you.
Sure. So we just received a question about what does bomb-proof mean in regards to a budget. And that's an excellent question when thinking about transparency. I was once working with a parish where there was a lot of conversation around how was spiritual formation money used. What bomb-proof means is there are no surprises. There are no unexpected oops, and we know exactly how funds are being used. The reason for this is specifically with baby boomers, with distrust of institutions, ensuring that they're getting accurate, appropriate information ensures that when you say to them that 6 cents of every dollar goes to X, Y, and Z, you can say that with integrity. Now, a mission-based budget. This is how we take what can be a really rather dry item, and I love Excel spreadsheets, by the way. I actually live my life off of these types of lists, but not everybody does, and not everybody feels compelled to give because they see a budget. So how do you put a narrative behind it? Mission-based budget can be used by creating what we like to call leader. You first go through and you list your ministries, meaning pastoral, your choir, formational ministries, youth, elderly, newcomer, any of those. You create a team to do this. Don't just have one person do it. Create a team because different people have different perspectives about what's being done, and maybe there's things taking place that you don't know about. Elaborate using a narrative on these ministries and arrange your ministries not just in bullet-proof, but in short narrative paragraphs. Then after you do that, distribute and communicate these ministries to stakeholders to get their feedback on it. Engage with the congregation about this narrative budget and remind the congregation of the continuing ministries. This is an example of a narrative budget that was used. You'll see that they separated their, let me see if I can get the arrow here. You'll see that they separated it to worship and pastoral care, administration and finance, formation, outreach and social justice, facilities, and larger church. One of the things that I also like to encourage people to think about is when you pay for staff, for clergy, and I have to tell you I have a vested interest in this because I am married to clergy. When you pay for clergy, oftentimes people don't like to think that their dollar might be going to your clergy's insurance or clergy's pension fund. Now, I think that's a very important thing, but not everybody does. What is a really good way to help people see through that problem to the greater missional good is to ask your clergy to give you a time breakdown. What percentage of their time is used on these different varying ministries, and then break out those costs, those administrative costs, accordingly. So that way, in your narrative budget, you could have under worship and pastoral care, well, 30% of our clergy's time is spent in this, so 30% of their pension should go here. Or another way to think about this is that electric bill. That electric bill that people don't always want to pay for if it's wintertime, right? Maybe they do. But in any case, you can also say, okay, 20% of our overall ministries are youth centers, so let's incorporate some of that electric bill there. These are just different ideas of applying missional activities to standard costs and bringing life to them. It's not just about the water coming out of the faucet, which is very important, but it's water coming out the faucet so that way you can have that very important potluck. So Terry's going to walk you through a little bit about what it means to be cultivating relationships.
Yes, none of this is going to do you any good if you just put your narrative budget in a brochure like the one that we showed you. And sorry about the print quality there. It's because the PowerPoint doesn't convert completely to the format here. It's clean on your PDFs. None of this will do you any good if you just print up a budget and mail it to everyone. You have to get personal. One of those studies that I was citing earlier from the University of Indiana shows that when a person is asked one-on-one to give by a person they know, the amount of the gift will increase 19% unless they're asked to give to a religious organization, at which point the giving, well, the average increase is 41%. So you need to have direct personal relationships with people as you ask them to support your cause. And the beauty of this is you see your donors at least every other week, often weekly. So your announcements, your preaching, your prayers as you open various activities during the week should all reflect how you're participating in the mission and vision. And then again, why ask when you can thank? I've already pointed out 60-second stewardship sermons. It's actually 1-minute stewardship sermons for Episcopalian. He's got 2 different books. It's a great way to highlight your mission. We have a question about getting personal. At what point should you contact a consistent visitor to participate in stewardship? And what I would say is, at what point would you ask a consistent visitor to join you for the Wednesday night soup suppers for Lent, or to join the choir? I would incorporate them into your financial practices as quickly as you would incorporate them into your fellowship or your outreach practices. Get online. When I do this workshop live, I have people raise their hands if they bank online. And then I say, now how many of you can give to your church online? And I don't mean go on the website and download a PDF of a pledge card. And I don't mean fill out a form and send it to the church office or an electronic transfer from your checking account to the church's account. I mean, go online and click give just like you do to transfer money from your checking to your savings or vice versa. If you aren't doing this, you are losing money. I can't tell you how many young donors and parishioners complain to me that their parishes do not have online giving. Depending on the source, and I must confess that all the studies I've read are sponsored by electronic giving vendors, so caveat emptor. But depending on the source, the increase in giving is varies, but it's consistently in the double digits. So this is your point of entry site for your new and your unchurched givers. And it's not a bad way to stabilize giving, during summer and holidays when people travel. People get confused and nervous when they start talking about online giving. They worry about identity theft and that sort of thing. They worry about user fees. It's going to take X percentage out of it. Please focus on the user experience, not the fees. Free is not necessarily better. Half of all PayPal transactions are abandoned before completion. Half of all PayPal, people give up before they finish giving to you. Network for Good adds 5% on the top of what the donor indicates for a gift. So if they say they want to give $100 to your church, what happens is they are charged $105. As a fundraiser, I would find that problematic for donor relations. So you want to be careful about that. As you get going on this, involve your potential users. Ask the people who might actually be using online giving, your younger people, your newer people. Get them on the committee to investigate options. Remember the Facebook saying, done is better than perfect. Start is better than perfect. Start here, go somewhere, but you need to get online. Finally, let's be honest. Annual giving of any type is always sort of under pressure to come up with the next new thing. It's hard to keep people's attention from year to year. Now you know that part of that is because of those age cohorts. As new donors come into your system, you're going to have to talk to them a little differently. Instead of this making you uptight, let it relax you. Have a little fun with it. This is a pledge card that you can find on ECF Vital Practices. It was designed as a Mad Lib, and you can pirate it here, or you could consider having a Mad Lib contest in your own parish. but the winning Mad Lib would have to be accompanied by a pledge by a certain date, and then you could run the card. So look at some creative things that you can do. Look at ways to involve as many people as possible. What you're seeing now is an email slide that was the, quote, credit for a video produced by a congregation. Actually, it was to pay down the debt, so it was more of a capital project. But easily half of the 25 people you see listed here, that is the only thing they did to help with that fundraising project. But just participating in making the video made them involved in the fundraising process. So you want to involve as many people as possible. You want to raise the fun quotient. Be relaxed about the idea that change can be good. The point is to mix things up. And here you're seeing what is an unrivaled success, a great endorsement for a new method that accommodates itself to the diversified wants of the congregation, which sounds like exactly what you need if you're going to accommodate all those age cohorts, right? In fact, this was the Reverend Sylvanus Stahl speaking in 1881. The great new system that he was advocating was pledge envelopes. So be sure this is not the last change your congregation ever sees. Look around and try something new. Now we're going to pause here. We've got a few minutes for questions. I've got contact information up here so that if we don't get to your question tonight, we can follow up by email, or you can follow up with us. I see a question about thanking people, and I suspect that it comes from a rector, because the question is, does the thank you always have to come from a rector? And then it's followed up by, please say no. The answer is, it depends. It depends on whom you are thanking. As you recall, Aaron pointed out that your converted members from the greatest generation will be the most affected by contact with a leadership person, your senior warden or your rector. So yes, actually, you want to thank that donor. The rector needs to thank that donor. But it might be a potential mentor who thanks your millennial. It might be someone who's benefited from the services of your food pantry who thanks a Generation Xer. So think about who it is who's being thanked. If you've got a large group, one of the things I've seen work well in large parishes is a gratitude committee. And those are people who take it on themselves to write those thank you letters as the gifts come in. In a smaller congregation, it's easy to know who should get a thank you letter from whom. Do you have other questions?
Oh, Terry, may I jump in there real quick?
Yes.
I think this is also in connection to that great idea that you had about on Sundays having those moments where we stop and we thank for the anthem. And the rector certainly can give those thank yous, but also when thinking about putting people in front of ministries, this is also a wonderful opportunity to identify those people. And so if the children are coming in on a Sunday morning, to be able to have the Sunday school teacher stand up and say, we just had a fabulous class where we learned about this, and it's due to your generous donations that we're able to do this. So that's another example of thanking.
Yes, it doesn't have to all be those handwritten notes, but those notes have a big impact, partly because people don't do it anymore, to the extent that I was working on a project at my parish, and my parish is large enough that they have a development director, and we had one of those gratitude committees where somebody wrote handwritten notes. The development director came up to me and said, oh, I got my note. That was so great. How did you make it look handwritten? So it's that rare. People think that it must be a trick. Nobody would actually handwrite a note. They will really appreciate it. Be sure that you do. If you've got another question, we've got about 2 more minutes. If you want to type a question into the chat, we'll be happy to take your questions. You've been a great group. This is a lot of folks here and a lot of information to absorb.
So there was, the text on the example of the narrative budget was really quite blurry. But when we send out the slides, it will be much more clear, right? So we'll be able to ensure people will have a proper example in their hands.
Yes, yes. And in fact, I would like to point out that that was one example of a narrative budget, but there are many different ways to do it. I've seen the narrative budget focus on the actual ministries, outreach, worship, centering prayer, that sort of thing. We're coming up on the end of our time. If we don't have any more questions, then we will thank everyone for joining us and for the good work that you're clearly